On a day in October 2024, the streets of Houston were calm yet bustling, but behind this facade lay a chilling story. Kyle Coolack, a man wanted in the area for 2 years, was finally apprehended in a twist of fate. During his years on the run, he lived incognito, skirting the edges of society and remaining isolated. However, destiny intervened swiftly. Just last week, a resident called the police stating that a man confessed to him, "I killed my brother." This shocking admission struck like a bolt from the blue, prompting law enforcement to act quickly. Coolack's true identity was unveiled, and he confessed to his crime. But the motive behind it left many wondering. What could have driven him to commit such an atrocity against his own brother? At that moment, the story of Kyle Coolack's flight was only just beginning to unfold. The informant was a kind and compassionate man living in Des Moines, leading a simple and ordinary life with a natural tendency to trust and help strangers. However, this kind-hearted citizen became the key figure in revealing the hidden life of Kyle Coolack. One day, he happened to encounter a homeless man on the street. This man was disheveled, haggard, and held a sign that read, "Veteran in need of help." Moved by this sight, the man approached and asked about his situation. The stranger introduced himself as Kyle, saying he was homeless due to financial difficulties and was currently surviving by begging on the streets. Learning that Kyle was once a veteran but had now fallen on hard times, the good-hearted man felt a sense of compassion. He invited him to stay at his home for a while and even helped him find a small job so he could settle down a bit. Thus, Kyle Coolack was welcomed into the man's home and became a part of their lives. In the first few weeks, Kyle behaved relatively normally. He was a man of few words but always seemed very cautious. He avoided talking about his past and didn't show much interest in everyday matters, as if he were deliberately hiding something. However, as time went on, the resident began to notice some oddities about Kyle. First, Kyle seemed to maintain a heightened sense of vigilance toward the outside world, often looking around even at odd hours and rarely allowing himself to relax. His behavior hinted at a sense of unease, as if he were ready to flee at any moment. Moreover, Kyle seldom interacted with others, avoiding any mention of his family or past life experiences. After Kyle Coolack was taken in by the resident, he unexpectedly met the man's sister. She was a young, warm-hearted woman with a close bond to her brother and often visited him for small get-togethers. Upon their first meeting, she felt a certain curiosity about Kyle's background, especially after learning that he was a veteran. Her sympathy grew, and although Kyle remained as reserved as ever, nodding and smiling politely, his mysterious demeanor only intrigued her further. Over time, she sensed that Kyle wasn't an ordinary wanderer. Despite his quiet detachment, there was a gentleness that occasionally surfaced in their interactions. She began to approach him more often, engaging him in casual conversation to understand his life a little better. She noticed that Kyle was uncomfortable with socializing and seemed cautious and guarded in his words. Every time she tried to ask about his past, he skillfully deflected the conversation, letting the topic fade away. Eventually, during one of their brothers' gatherings, she invited Kyle out for a drink. At first, he hesitated, but after her warm encouragement, he reluctantly agreed. They went to a quiet bar, ordered a few drinks, and in the soft, dim lighting, the conversation between them gradually relaxed, creating a warm and familiar atmosphere. They talked about life and various experiences, and under her gentle guidance, Kyle slowly lowered his guard, revealing traces of his true emotions. As the drinks continued, Kyle's mood seemed to shift. His expression grew complex, sometimes silent, sometimes murmuring, as though a hidden truth weighed heavily on his mind. Sensing this, the woman gently encouraged him to open up, softly saying, "You've probably been through a lot. If you're willing to talk, I'm here to listen." For a moment, a flash of struggle and pain crossed Kyle's eyes. After a pause, he suddenly whispered, "I did something really terrible." Hearing this, the woman's heart skipped a beat, but she stayed calm, waiting for him to continue. Kyle's demeanor grew even more intense, as though the long-suppressed emotions fueled by the alcohol were finally coming to the surface. He looked up, staring directly at her, and in a low, urgent voice confessed, "I killed my brother." These words hit her like a hammer, and she froze in shock. She stared at him, barely able to believe what she'd heard. In that moment, all traces of the alcohol's warmth disappeared, replaced by a chilling sense of fear and disbelief. She instinctively recoiled, wanting to escape from this harsh truth, but her body felt paralyzed, unable to move. Taking a deep breath, she fought to stay calm, her mind racing as she tried to figure out what to do next. She knew that the man before her was no longer just a lonely veteran, but a fugitive who had taken his own brother's life. Yet she kept her emotions in check, even suppressing her own fear. She nodded slightly, maintaining her composure as she asked, Why did you do it?" Kyle's expression darkened, his fists clenched tightly, and he murmured, "There was too much bad blood between us. I don't want to talk about it." Understanding that pressing him further would be pointless, she nodded, feigning acceptance, and subtly shifted the conversation to avoid agitating him further. On that fateful night after drinks, Kyle Coolack's shocking confession left the woman filled with terror. After returning home, she quickly texted her brother, detailing Kyle's admission that he had killed his own brother. The siblings exchanged messages, and the brother, trying to confirm the truth, subtly approached Kyle in the following days, hoping to gather more details. Sure enough, during a late-night conversation, Kyle again admitted to his crime, showing a glimmer of regret and exhaustion. The brother, though shaken by the revelation, knew what needed to be done. He realized he had to report everything to the police and could no longer keep this dangerous secret. However, just as he decided to make the call, Kyle seemed to sense something was wrong. Early one morning, he quietly left the family's home, once more taking to the road in his attempt to flee. The siblings were filled with anxiety, not only worried about the potential danger Kyle posed, but also about the burden of revealing the entire truth. Upon receiving the report, the police quickly launched a search operation. They had a clear description of Kyle's appearance, his direction, and possible route. Since he had not been on the run for long, the authorities were able to track him down swiftly. After several hours of searching, they spotted a suspicious man walking along a nearby highway, heading toward Fort Dodge. At 7:33 a.m., police intercepted the man on the highway and asked him to show identification. The man looked visibly nervous and attempted to provide a false name, hoping to evade further questioning. After a brief exchange, the officers grew more suspicious of his evasive behavior and decided to take him into custody for further identity verification. Within less than an hour of detention, Kyle realized he couldn't continue hiding. Faced with the officers' persistent questioning, his defenses began to crumble, and he finally admitted his real identity. He confessed that he was, in fact, Kyle Andrew Coolack, the fugitive wanted in Houston for the murder of his brother. As police escorted Kyle away, his expression was complex, showing a mix of relief and lingering guilt. He knew that his 2 years on the run had come to an end, and that his dark past was now fully exposed to the light. The night of March 11, 2022, felt like the storm fate had set upon the Coolack brothers, irreversibly altering both of their lives. The evening was tense and damp, with a chilling atmosphere enveloping the entire neighborhood. Brad Coolack and Kyle Coolack were in their Houston apartment, both feeling worn out and distant, the tension between them brewing, ready to explode at any moment. The resentment between them had been simmering for years. Kyle had endured his own set of hardships, marked by traumatic experiences during his time in the military. Upon his return, he struggled to find his place in normal life, while Brad led a more settled existence, with a steady job and attempts to build a family. Their paths had diverged drastically, and the gap between them widened, but the differences in their lifestyles were not the only source of tension. That night's argument started over trivial matters, small grievances piling up and escalating rapidly. Brad was disappointed with Kyle's lack of direction and purpose, frustrated by what he saw as Kyle's inability to contribute to the family's well-being. Initially, Brad merely voiced his dissatisfaction, calling Kyle irresponsible, but his patronizing tone struck a nerve, igniting a deep-seated anger within Kyle. Suddenly, Brad's voice grew louder as he pointed directly at Kyle, shouting, "Do you even remember what you did? You betrayed me. You went behind my back with my wife while I was gone." Brad's accusation hit Kyle like a hammer. He hadn't expected Brad to bring up this painful past, and his face turned pale as conflicting emotions, shame, anger, and even a hint of fury, rippled across it. "That was a mistake, Brad," Kyle shot back, barely containing his rage. "You don't understand what I was going through back then. Who are you to judge me?" His voice cracked with long-held anger, and for the first time he let the years of unresolved tension surface. The argument intensified with each word, and the atmosphere in the room became almost suffocating. Brad continued to berate Kyle, recounting how his brother's betrayal had ruined his trust, how he could no longer view Kyle as family. Brad even attacked Kyle's approach to life, his tone laced with disappointment and disdain. By this point, Kyle's anger had reached its breaking point. Cornered by Brad's relentless words, he felt as if he had been backed into an emotional corner. Past traumas and painful memories flooded his mind. Suddenly, Kyle rushed toward Brad, reducing the space between them to only a few paces. The tension was thick, almost tangible. At that very moment, Brad delivered one final blow. "You destroyed my life, Kyle. I'll never forgive you." That last statement was the final straw, pushing Kyle beyond reason. Almost reflexively, he reached for a handgun, his fingers trembling as he pointed it at Brad, his eyes a mixture of fury, sorrow, and defiance. The moment Brad finished his last sentence, the sound of gunshots shattered the quiet of the night. Neighbors heard the loud echoing bangs and rushed to their windows, peering out in fear and confusion. The stillness of the aftermath was soon broken by the distant wail of sirens, and the neighborhood was gripped by a sense of foreboding. Brad lay motionless on the floor, multiple gunshot wounds covering his body, staining the ground with dark red. Kyle, still clutching the gun, stood in stunned silence, a lingering expression of rage mixed with shock and regret. He couldn't believe that he had pulled the trigger on his own brother, and the reality felt surreal. That night marked the breaking point of their complicated relationship, a bond fractured by betrayal and resentment. The seeds of that confrontation had been planted long before. To Brad, Kyle was the brother who had betrayed him and shattered his trust, an unforgivable act. To Kyle, Brad had always been the patronizing, judgmental older brother who saw him as a failure, casting an unforgiving shadow over his life. After receiving the emergency call reporting Brad Coolack's murder, the police quickly arrived at the scene and began a thorough investigation. The crime scene was Brad's sparsely decorated apartment, left in disarray, showing signs of a recent heated argument. Police found multiple gunshot wounds on Brad's body and several spent shell casings scattered nearby. Ballistic analysis confirmed that this was a premeditated murder. As investigators delved deeper into Brad's relationships and family background, they soon began to focus on his younger brother, Kyle Coolack, as a primary suspect. The police uncovered that an intense argument had erupted between the brothers on the night of the murder, and neighbors reported hearing loud fighting and gunshots. Friends and colleagues of Brad also disclosed that the brothers had unresolved issues. As police connected the dots, suspicion of Kyle's involvement grew stronger. To substantiate Kyle's connection to the crime, the police collected additional evidence from the scene. They meticulously searched Brad's apartment, hoping to find any trace of Kyle. Investigators discovered several fingerprints throughout the apartment, some of which were confirmed to be Kyle's. Furthermore, prints on the shell casings matched Kyle's, strengthening the theory that he was present during the crime. To further understand the motives, investigators sought out Brad's ex-wife, hoping to uncover more insight. She disclosed a past affair with Kyle that occurred when Brad was deployed overseas. Though the affair ended after Brad returned, he had eventually discovered it, fueling intense anger toward Kyle. This revelation offered the police a deeper understanding of the emotional undercurrents that might have led to Brad's tragic death, with unresolved family tensions appearing as a possible catalyst. In addition to the affair, the police examined Kyle's background more closely. After serving in the military for several years, Kyle struggled to adapt to civilian life, experiencing instability and frequent job changes. His mental state was reportedly fragile, with frequent outbursts of erratic behavior. Brad, seeing Kyle's struggles, attempted to offer help, but Kyle grew resentful, perceiving his brother's efforts as condescending. This tension, combined with lingering feelings about the affair, pushed their relationship to a breaking point. Armed with substantial evidence, the police decided to formally charge Kyle Coolack with murder and issued a warrant for his arrest. However, by the time they attempted to locate him at his residence, Kyle had vanished without a trace. Through neighbors and acquaintances, police learned that Kyle might have sensed the investigation's progress and chosen to go on the run. From that moment, Kyle became the police's primary target. Over the following months, authorities tracked his movements across multiple states, but his whereabouts remained uncertain as he kept a low profile, avoiding close connections with anyone. Kyle's lifestyle during this time became increasingly unstable. He moved like a drifter, relying on meager earnings from odd jobs, and in some towns, posing as a veteran in need of help to survive. Despite the hardships of life on the run, Kyle seemed to find a twisted sense of peace in his isolation. Yet the mental toll of his circumstances grew heavier with time, until finally, after a night of heavy drinking, he divulged the secret he had been hiding. After his arrest, Kyle Coolack faced the impending extradition process, and during the days of waiting to return to Texas, his emotions were incredibly complex. After being captured, he was held in a local jail where the surrounding environment made him feel immensely isolated. Every day he could hear the whispers and cries of other inmates while he remained trapped in the shadows of his past, unable to escape. He knew that in Texas he would face a harsher trial for his crimes, and this anxiety and fear constantly gnawed at him. Meanwhile, the media's intense focus on the case quickly turned it into national news. Reports detailed Kyle's life on the run and the complex relationship with his brother. The media continuously followed the case's developments, analyzing Kyle's motives and exploring the breakdown of family relationships, which sparked public discussions about violent crime. Journalists interviewed friends, family, and psychological experts of Brad Coolack, seeking to uncover the roots of this tragedy. As coverage deepened, public reaction to the case became increasingly fervent. Many people voiced their opinions on social media, discussing the psychological motivations behind the murder and its impact on families. Some expressed sympathy for Kyle, arguing that he faced many difficulties and setbacks in life after his military service, which ultimately led to his emotional breakdown. Others felt anger toward his actions, believing that no family conflict could justify murder. This clash of perspectives fueled intense debates on social platforms, reflecting society's varied views on the roots of violent crime. In this public discourse, some experts and psychologists began to reflect on the broader impact of murder cases on families and society. They pointed out that disharmony within family relationships, particularly emotional betrayal and misunderstandings, often serves as a potential trigger for violent behavior. Additionally, with the media spotlight, society's attention to mental health issues grew stronger. Many people started to recognize that the psychological trauma faced by veterans and its impact on families is a matter that needs urgent consideration. During this period of awaiting extradition, Kyle's story became more than just a murder case. It sparked societal contemplation of deeper issues. People began to realize that every small conflict within a family could unknowingly evolve into an irreversible tragedy, and that mental health issues are topics that everyone should address. This reflection encouraged society to more actively discuss how to assist those who experience psychological trauma and seek effective solutions to prevent similar tragedies in the future. As the extradition date approached, Kyle's fate hung in the balance, while societal discussions continued to deepen, with everyone looking forward to how lessons could be learned from this case to find better pathways for families and society's future. Kyle Coolack's life trajectory resembles a tragic novel, transforming from a once promising young soldier into a wanted fugitive. His journey is filled with irreversible choices and profound lessons. 2 years ago, an argument with his brother escalated into a tragedy, setting him on a path of despair and evasion. The cost of fleeing from legal consequences ultimately resulted in the loss of his freedom and the severing of relationships that could have been mended. This ending is not just a personal tragedy, it signifies the destruction of a family. In examining Coolack's story, we cannot help but reflect on what led him down this dark path. Family conflicts, a lack of mental health support, and society's neglect of veterans are all factors worthy of deep consideration. The social discourse surrounding criminal psychology has become increasingly significant. In an environment filled with pressure and conflict, what choices can an individual make? Do they succumb to despair, or do they seek help and change? Through Coolack's experiences, viewers are forced to confront a profound reality. Every choice in life carries unpredictable consequences. Each decision has the potential to alter the course of one's life, and the costs associated with those choices are often beyond what we can bear. Behind the story lies an exploration of humanity and a questioning of social responsibility. It is hoped that as everyone reflects on this narrative, they will provoke thought, understand the complex relationships between family, society, and the individual, and ultimately make wiser choices in their own lives.